Most people think success is an event, a single moment, a big promotion, a startup exit, a trophy on the shelf, applause in a crowded room, but success rarely looks like that from the inside. From the inside, success feels like a string of small decisions repeated quietly, long before anyone is watching. The truth is, success is less about intensity and more about consistency. Anyone can sprint hard for a week. Very few people can walk steadily for 10 years. The world doesn't reward what you do occasionally. It rewards what you do habitually. Think about brushing your teeth. If you skip it once, nothing changes. If you skip it every day for 5 years, the results are obvious. Habits are just like that, compounding in ways that are invisible at first, then impossible to ignore later. Here's the paradox. Bad habits demand instant payment. Good habits pay later with interest. Eating junk feels good now, health problems come later. Reading a book feels boring now, wisdom compounds later. Checking social media gives you a dopamine hit now. Creating something meaningful gives you fulfillment years later. The timing of reward is what separates habits that destroy you from habits that build you. What makes habits powerful is that they don't ask for perfection. You don't need to run a marathon tomorrow. You just need to put on your shoes today. You don't need to write a book tonight. You just need to write a paragraph. Small acts done daily erase the illusion that success is out of reach. Consider money. Most wealth isn't built by one lucky trade or a jackpot. It's built by someone who saved consistently, invested patiently, and let time do the heavy lifting. The same rule applies to every other part of life. Relationships aren't strong because of one big romantic gesture, but because of everyday trust and kindness. Skills aren't mastered through bursts of obsession, but through the dull repetition of practice. The danger is that habits are invisible while they are forming. A donut doesn't ruin your health, and a salad doesn't make you fit. A single skipped workout doesn't matter, and neither does a single push-up. That's why people underestimate them, but compound effects are quiet in the beginning. Success hides in the shadows of daily behavior, waiting for time to expose it. Ask yourself, what are you doing repeatedly without thinking? Because your future will look a lot like your current habits, magnified over time. If you want to know where you'll be in 10 years, don't look at your goals. Look at your habits. Success is not built in a moment, but in the daily choices you repeat consistently. We live in a culture that glorifies breakthrough moments, the dramatic wins, the headlines, the viral stories. A company raises millions overnight, an athlete breaks a record, an artist suddenly goes global. But beneath every sudden breakthrough lies years of uncelebrated consistency, habits stacked on top of habits, choices repeated so often they became part of identity. What the world calls luck is often just the visible tip of a habit iceberg that has been forming for years below the surface. Think about someone who runs a marathon. The finish line is a single moment, but the preparation isn't. Every morning run, every decision to get up instead of sleeping in, every glass of water chosen over soda, every stretch after training, every small decision layered on top of the last. These are the building blocks of that finish line moment. When people cheer at the end, they are celebrating not the final 26 miles, but the thousands of tiny decisions that happened quietly long before the event. The truth is, you can't have a great event without great habits leading up to it. We often underestimate the power of small choices because they don't deliver immediate results. If you choose to eat a healthy breakfast tomorrow, you won't see abs in the mirror. If you decide to read a book for 10 minutes tonight, you won't wake up as a genius tomorrow. But just as a single raindrop doesn't flood a street, yet millions of drops change the landscape, your repeated choices shape you in ways that time will magnify. The gap between success and failure is often nothing more than the accumulation of those tiny daily votes you cast for the person you want to become. Consistency beats intensity because consistency compounds. Most people overestimate what they can do in a week and underestimate what they can do in 5 years. You don't need a single massive push that changes everything. You need repeated nudges that compound over months and years. Success is less like lightning and more like erosion. Lightning is dramatic and rare. Erosion is slow and invisible, but it carves mountains. Your daily habits are the erosion of your character, your skills, your results. They slowly carve out the person you are becoming. Take money as an example. Almost no one builds wealth through one giant lucky strike. They build it through the discipline of saving consistently, investing steadily, and allowing compounding to work. The remarkable thing is that even small amounts, handled with consistency, become massive over time. A person who saves modestly but consistently will almost always outpace the one who tries to get rich quickly but sporadically. The same law applies outside of finance. In your health, in your relationships, in your career, consistency outperforms intensity. The challenge is that habits are easy to dismiss because they are easy to do and easy not to do. Drinking a glass of water, stretching for 5 minutes, writing down 3 ideas, spending 10 minutes learning something new. These things seem trivial in the moment. No one claps for you, no one congratulates you, and often you don't even see the difference. But repeat them daily, stack them over years, and the compounding becomes visible. You transform not because of a single decision, but because of the thousands of invisible ones that accumulate into identity. Success hides in plain sight inside these tiny daily votes. If you want to see what kind of person you will become, don't look at your goals, look at your habits. Goals are intentions, habits are proof. It's one thing to say you want to be healthy, it's another to exercise consistently. It's one thing to say you want to be wealthy, it's another to save consistently. It's one thing to say you want to be wise, it's another to read and reflect consistently. Your daily repeated choices reveal what you actually value, not what you wish you valued. When you see someone succeed, it's easy to assume they got lucky or they had extraordinary talent. But more often than not, they had ordinary talent and extraordinary consistency. They chose again and again to keep showing up, to keep doing the boring thing that mattered, to keep stacking the bricks even when no wall was visible. This is the unglamorous side of success that rarely gets written about because it's not exciting. But it's the truth. A castle isn't built in a day. It's built one stone at a time, laid patiently, until the structure is strong enough to be admired. Consistency also builds trust, both with yourself and with others. When you keep a small promise to yourself every day, you begin to trust your own word. That trust builds confidence because you know you'll follow through on bigger commitments when they come. And when others see your consistent actions, they start to trust you too. Reliability becomes part of your identity. People are drawn to those who do what they say, who keep showing up, who don't just burn bright once but burn steadily for years. Success isn't just about what you achieve, it's also about who you become in the process, and habits are the forge that shapes that identity. The real test of your habits is whether they can survive when motivation disappears. Motivation is a spark. Habits are the wood that keeps the fire alive. No one feels motivated every day, but you don't need to when you have habits. You don't need to think about brushing your teeth, you just do it. You don't need to negotiate with yourself about whether to go to work, you just do it. In the same way, the habits that lead to success eventually become automatic, and that's when their power multiplies. Success doesn't announce itself when it arrives. Often you don't even notice you're succeeding until others point it out. One day you realize your body is stronger, your mind sharper, your work more valuable, your relationships deeper. But none of it felt like success on a daily basis. It felt like showing up, doing the work, making the choices, repeating the process. The moment you achieve something big, you'll look back and realize it wasn't the big moment that mattered. It was the countless little ones stacked on top of each other that created the foundation. Good habits compound quietly over time, just like small investments grow into wealth. The difficulty is that people often expect results too quickly. When they don't see a big payoff right away, they assume the habit isn't working, so they quit. But habits follow the same curve as compound interest. In the beginning, the growth is invisible, frustrating, and easy to underestimate. Only after enough time has passed do the results become undeniable. The first months of working out show little change, but the years reveal a transformed body. The first months of writing daily may produce nothing remarkable, but the years reveal a voice, an audience, maybe even a career. The compounding of habits works quietly in the shadows until one day everyone else calls it overnight success. Think about planting a tree. For years it looks fragile, growing slowly, unnoticed, but beneath the surface the roots are digging deep, anchoring it to the earth. By the time the trunk is strong enough to hold branches and shade, you realize how much growth was happening when you weren't paying attention. Habits work in the same hidden way. When you practice a skill, build discipline, or commit to consistent behavior, most of the change is invisible at first. You don't notice the subtle shifts in your mind or your body, but they're happening. And one day, like the tree, the results are suddenly visible and impossible to ignore. The magic of compounding is that small inputs can lead to outsized outcomes. $1 saved today becomes much more valuable 10 years later. A page read today adds up to hundreds of books in a decade. A skill practiced for 10 minutes a day eventually turns into mastery. The numbers never look impressive at first because compounding is deceptive. It hides its rewards in the early stages and unleashes them later. This is why most people abandon habits too soon. They quit in the quiet season before compounding has time to show its strength. Think about how people approach health. Someone goes to the gym for 2 weeks, doesn't see results, and stops. But 2 weeks is nothing in the timeline of compounding. Imagine saving money for 2 weeks and expecting to retire rich. It sounds absurd, yet that's how many people treat habits. The real value comes when you keep going long after the excitement wears off, when the effort feels ordinary and boring, when you're no longer doing it for instant results, but because it's simply who you are. That's when compounding is allowed to work, and that's when the quiet growth starts to reveal itself in visible form. Habits compound not only in what you gain, but in who you become. Each repetition reinforces identity. Every time you choose to exercise, you are casting a vote for being someone who values health. Every time you read, you are voting for being a learner. Every time you save money, you are voting for being disciplined. These identity votes accumulate until one day you no longer need to force the behavior. It becomes natural because you've become the kind of person who does it without thinking. Compounding works on behavior but also on self-image, which is why small, consistent habits can transform a life even when no one else notices the change day to day. The hidden advantage of compounding habits is the spillover effect. Learning discipline in one area tends to bleed into others. Someone who builds the habit of exercising regularly often finds it easier to stay disciplined with money. Someone who develops the habit of reading widely often becomes better at communicating. Someone who builds the habit of saving consistently often becomes more thoughtful about long-term planning in other areas of life. The gains from habits rarely stay confined to the original area. They spill into every corner, multiplying the rewards in ways you didn't expect. We often look at successful people and assume their results came from a few big choices. But if you examine their lives closely, you'll find a set of small, repeatable actions that they stuck with longer than most. A musician practices scales daily. A writer fills a page every morning. An athlete shows up to the gym, even on days they don't feel like it. Each action alone seems insignificant, but together they compound into greatness. The difference between those who succeed and those who don't is rarely intelligence or talent. It is almost always persistence with habits long enough to let compounding work. Bad habits compound too, but in reverse. Neglecting health, wasting time, ignoring small responsibilities. They don't ruin you instantly, but they compound into regret over years. Skipping exercise doesn't matter today, but multiplied over a decade, it changes your body. Spending impulsively doesn't hurt today, but multiplied over years, it leaves you financially fragile. Just as good habits quietly compound into strength, bad habits quietly compound into weakness. The tragedy is that both processes are invisible in the beginning, which makes it easy to ignore their impact until it's too late. The discipline, then, is not just in forming good habits, but in protecting them long enough to allow compounding to reveal its power. It's easy to start a habit. The world is filled with people who begin with energy and enthusiasm. It's harder to continue when progress feels invisible. But if you can stay the course during that invisible stage, you give yourself access to the exponential curve of growth that only a few ever experience. That curve is what separates people who plateau from people who break through. Habits also compound in relationships. A single act of kindness might not change a friendship, but repeated acts of kindness build trust and loyalty. Consistently listening to someone, consistently showing up when you're needed, consistently being reliable. These habits don't feel remarkable, but they compound into deep, lasting bonds. The same is true in business. A company that consistently delivers value, treats people well, and makes incremental improvements eventually builds a reputation that becomes its greatest asset. Compounding trust, compounding reputation, compounding character. All of these are built through habits repeated over years. The most misunderstood part of compounding is patience. People want the hockey stick curve without the flat, boring early years, but the early years are the price of admission. You can't skip them. You can't hack compounding. You can only plant the seed and water it, even when nothing seems to be happening. The ones who win are simply those who stay patient long enough to see the payoff. They keep saving, they keep writing, they keep practicing, they keep showing up. Then one day the world sees their results and calls it sudden, but it wasn't sudden. It was quiet, compounding work that had been growing all along. Bad habits feel rewarding now but cost you later. Good habits feel costly now but reward you later. This is one of the most difficult truths for people to accept because human beings are wired to chase immediate gratification. Our brains evolved in a world where short-term rewards meant survival. Eating when food was available, resting when energy was low, taking advantage of immediate pleasures. All of this made sense thousands of years ago. But in the modern world, most of the challenges we face require long-term thinking. Health, wealth, relationships, careers. These things don't reward you instantly. They reward you only after years of repeated, disciplined effort. That's why so many people find themselves trapped in cycles of choosing short-term pleasure at the expense of long-term success. Bad habits are seductive because they give something quickly. Eating fast food delivers taste and fullness immediately. Scrolling endlessly through social media delivers dopamine hits instantly. Spending money impulsively delivers excitement in the moment. Skipping the gym gives relief from discomfort right away. The cost of these habits doesn't show up until later, and when it does, it arrives multiplied. Poor health, wasted time, financial instability, regret. All of these are the accumulated interest of short-term decisions. The tragedy is that by the time the cost shows up, the habits are already deeply ingrained, making them harder to change. Good habits, on the other hand, demand an upfront cost. Exercise is uncomfortable in the moment. Saving money feels restrictive when everyone else is spending freely. Reading or studying feels slower and less exciting than entertainment. Waking up early feels painful when sleep is warm and comforting. These actions often don't deliver anything visible right away, which makes them easy to abandon. But with enough time, the rewards accumulate and compound. A stronger body, financial security, deep knowledge, meaningful skills, confidence, opportunities. These are the long-term dividends of habits that felt difficult in the beginning. It's almost like life has a delayed payment system. Bad habits give you the reward first and send you the bill later. Good habits ask you to pay first and deliver the reward later, and the bill is always larger than the reward. Eating junk food for pleasure today is rarely worth the health problems later. Overspending for a thrill today is rarely worth the stress of debt later. On the other side, the cost of exercising, learning, and saving feels big in the moment, but the reward that arrives later is much larger than what you paid. Understanding this system of delayed payment is essential to breaking free from the trap of instant gratification. One way to think about it is this: every choice you make is either borrowing from your future or investing in it. Bad habits are loans you take out on your future self. They provide temporary relief, but leave your future self with the burden of repayment. Good habits are investments you make into your future self. They require sacrifice now, but gift your future self with freedom, health, wealth, and peace of mind. Every day you're either adding weight to your future self's shoulders or lightening the load. The balance sheet of your life is built on these small daily trades. The difficulty is that humans are naturally impatient. We want to see progress now. That's why so many people abandon good habits before they can compound into results. They don't understand that progress is often invisible in the early stages. The workout today doesn't change your body. The savings deposit today doesn't make you rich. The book you read tonight doesn't make you brilliant. But stack them up over years and the results are life-altering. The short-term discomfort was never wasted. It was building something behind the scenes, something your future self would thank you for. There's a story about bamboo that captures this perfectly. When bamboo is planted, it spends years growing roots underground with nothing visible above the surface. For a long time, it seems like nothing is happening, but when it finally breaks the surface, it grows rapidly, sometimes several feet in a single day. Good habits are like bamboo. They feel unrewarding at first because the growth is hidden. But when the breakthrough comes, it looks sudden and extraordinary to everyone else, even though the real work was happening quietly for years. Bad habits often disguise themselves as harmless because the negative effects are delayed. Skipping a workout once doesn't matter. Spending money you don't have once doesn't matter. Eating unhealthy once doesn't matter. But the danger lies in the repetition. Each bad habit whispers, just this once won't hurt. But in reality, every repetition strengthens the pattern. The brain learns the behavior, the identity shifts, and over time, the small harmless act becomes a deeply ingrained routine with significant consequences. It's not the one choice that hurts you, it's the accumulation. The most successful people are not those who avoid discomfort, but those who learn to endure it in the short term for long-term reward. They understand that temporary pain is the price of lasting gain. They lift the weights when it hurts, they read when it's boring, they save when it feels restrictive, they practice when no one is watching. To outsiders, it looks like they have extraordinary discipline, but really, they've trained themselves to value future rewards over present comfort. That mindset is rare, which is why the rewards of good habits are rare too. One of the best strategies to overcome the pull of bad habits is to make the cost immediate instead of delayed. If you have an accountability partner who knows whether you worked out or not, the social cost is immediate. If you set up your finances so that money is automatically saved before you can spend it, the friction of bad spending becomes immediate. If you create small daily trackers for your habits, the visible gap of not following through creates immediate discomfort. The brain responds more strongly to what happens now, so by shifting the feedback loop, you make it easier to avoid bad habits and sustain good ones. At the same time, it's important to make the rewards of good habits feel closer. Celebrate small wins, track progress visually, reward yourself for consistency, not just results. The brain craves reward, and if the only reward of a good habit is years away, it's difficult to sustain. By creating micro-rewards along the way, you bridge the gap between the upfront cost and the long-term payoff, making it more likely that you'll stay on track long enough to experience the compounding. When you zoom out and look at life over decades, the distinction between good and bad habits becomes stark. The person who chose comfort in the moment pays with regret later. The person who chose discomfort in the moment is paid with freedom later. Regret is always heavier than discipline, but it's only visible in hindsight. That's why the people who seem wise are usually those who thought further ahead, who were willing to endure small costs daily to avoid large costs later. Perfection isn't required. Progress through small, repeated actions is what shapes success. One of the biggest misconceptions people carry is the belief that they need flawless execution in order to reach their goals. They imagine a perfect morning routine, an uninterrupted streak, an error-free plan that never slips. The reality is much less dramatic. Success doesn't come from perfection, it comes from persistence. It comes from the willingness to keep showing up, even when yesterday wasn't ideal, even when mistakes pile up, even when progress is slower than expected. The pursuit of perfection paralyzes people, while the pursuit of progress frees them to act. There is a myth that highly successful people have it all figured out, that they live with unbroken discipline, that they never fall short. Look closer and you will see the opposite. They miss workouts, they fail at projects, they waste time, they make errors. But what separates them from others is not the absence of mistakes. It is their refusal to let mistakes end the journey. They return, they adjust, they try again. The consistency of showing up outweighs the occasional missteps. 100 small imperfect efforts beat one perfect effort that never repeats. The idea of all or nothing is what destroys more progress than failure ever could. People set a goal to eat healthy, and the first day they slip, they abandon the entire plan. They aim to write every day, miss 2 days, and convince themselves it's not worth continuing. They picture success as a perfect streak, and the moment the streak breaks, they lose hope. But success isn't a streak, it's an accumulation. Missing once doesn't matter, missing repeatedly without returning does. Progress comes from lowering the expectation of perfection and raising the commitment to simply return after every failure. Small, repeated actions may feel insignificant in the moment. Writing a few sentences doesn't feel like writing a book. Saving a few dollars doesn't feel like building wealth. Doing a short workout doesn't feel like building strength. But when those actions stack up, they change the trajectory of your life. Success is not a leap, it is a slope. Each action moves you slightly upward or downward, and over years, those tiny slopes separate people into very different destinations. The person who improves by just 1% each day is unrecognizable from the person who doesn't after enough time has passed. The power of small actions lies not just in their cumulative effect, but in their accessibility. A perfect plan is hard to sustain, but a small action is always within reach. If you cannot work for an hour, you can work for 5 minutes. If you cannot read a book, you can read a page. If you cannot run 5 miles, you can walk around the block. These small acts keep the chain unbroken. They remind your brain that you are still the kind of person who shows up. They protect your identity as someone committed, even if the progress is minimal on a given day. Over time, the identity becomes stronger than the outcome. You start to believe that you are consistent, and that belief fuels further action. Perfectionists often waste more time planning than doing. They wait for the perfect environment, the perfect timing, the perfect tools. Meanwhile, the imperfect doers accumulate practice, experience, and results. Waiting for the perfect conditions is a trap because conditions are never perfect. Progress is made by those who begin where they are, with what they have, and adjust as they go. Every master was once a beginner who started poorly and improved through repetition, not through perfection. The willingness to look foolish at first is the price of looking skilled later. Mistakes themselves are teachers when viewed correctly. An imperfect action often reveals more than a perfect one ever could. You learn through feedback, and feedback only comes from doing. Trying and failing shows you what doesn't work, which is information you could never gain by waiting for the flawless plan. Each misstep is not a disqualification, but a direction sign pointing you toward adjustment. The faster you collect feedback through small, imperfect actions, the faster you refine your path. In every field, athletics, art, business, personal growth. The breakthroughs people admire are built on mountains of ordinary attempts. The athlete missed thousands of shots, the artist discarded countless drafts, the entrepreneur tested endless ideas that failed. The public sees the polished result and assumes perfection, but behind the scenes was an environment of experimentation, imperfection, and persistent effort. Progress is messy, but it is the mess that shapes mastery. Small actions repeated consistently also reduce the psychological weight of success. A massive goal looks overwhelming when viewed as one mountain to climb. But when broken into tiny steps, it becomes approachable. A book is not 300 pages, it is a single sentence written over and over. A business is not a finished empire, it is a series of small decisions made daily. Fitness is not a transformation overnight, it is showing up for short sessions again and again. This framing allows people to begin because starting small is far less intimidating than chasing perfection in one giant leap. There is also a compounding emotional benefit to small repeated actions. Each small win provides momentum. Finishing a 5-minute workout makes it easier to commit to 10 minutes tomorrow. Writing a single paragraph builds confidence to write 2 the next day. Progress builds belief, and belief sustains progress. The perfectionist who never begins never experiences this momentum. but the one who starts small rides the compounding wave of incremental progress. The pursuit of progress instead of perfection also creates resilience. If success depended on flawless execution, one mistake would end the journey. But if success is defined by progress, mistakes are just part of the process. This mindset shift removes the fear of failure. Failure becomes feedback, not a final verdict. When you know that perfection isn't required, you are more willing to experiment, to try new things, to step outside your comfort zone. Growth requires risk, and risk requires tolerance for imperfection. Even in relationships, this principle holds true. A perfect friend, partner, or parent does not exist. What strengthens bonds is not flawless behavior, but consistent small acts of care, forgiveness, and presence. The imperfections are inevitable, but the willingness to return, repair, and repeat positive actions is what builds trust. Just like success in personal goals, success in relationships is shaped not by perfection, but by persistence in doing the small things over and over again. When you zoom out and look at the arc of a lifetime, the defining factor is rarely a handful of perfect days. It is the thousands of ordinary days where small, repeated actions were chosen. Those who demand perfection exhaust themselves and quit. Those who accept imperfection and keep going quietly build a body of work, a level of health, a foundation of wealth, a depth of character. They don't need perfection because the power lies in persistence. Your future will resemble your habits more than your goals. Habits are destiny in slow motion. Goals are attractive because they feel inspiring. They give you something to point to, a vision that seems like it will pull you forward. People write them down, hang them on walls, announce them publicly. Goals create energy, but they don't create results on their own. What shapes results are the small decisions you make every day, the routines you follow when nobody is watching, the automatic behaviors you perform without needing to think. A goal says where you want to go, but habits decide whether you get there. Most people think their future will be determined by a big break, a single opportunity, or a defining moment. The truth is more ordinary and far more powerful. The future is determined by the behaviors that repeat so often they stop being choices and start being identity. If you read daily, your future self will look wise and articulate. If you exercise daily, your future self will look strong and healthy. If you save and invest consistently, your future self will look secure and free. The connection is not mysterious, it is direct. Habits are the invisible architecture that builds the person you become. The tricky thing about goals is that they are easy to dream about but hard to act upon consistently. Anyone can set a goal to write a book, but only those who build the habit of writing regularly actually finish. Anyone can set a goal to run a marathon, but only those who build the habit of training consistently cross the finish line. The world is filled with people who had goals they never lived up to, and almost all of them fell short because they never aligned their habits with their ambitions. The disconnect between vision and behavior is what kills progress. Habits are more reliable than goals because they operate daily without fanfare. You may forget about your goal, but you don't forget about your routine. You may lose motivation for your vision, but if your habit is strong, it carries you forward anyway. That is why the most successful people often talk less about goals and more about systems. A system is simply a collection of habits designed to make progress inevitable. When you put your energy into building systems rather than obsessing over goals, you create a structure that works in the background, moving you forward whether you feel inspired or not. Imagine two people who both want to learn a new language. One sets a goal, I want to be fluent in 2 years. The other builds a habit, I will practice for 15 minutes every day. After a few weeks, both look similar. After a few months, the one with the habit is progressing steadily, while the one with only a goal is struggling to stay consistent. After a year, the gap is undeniable. The habit, carrier, keeps improving automatically, while the goal, carrier, is still starting and stopping. Over the long run, the habit wins every time because it doesn't rely on bursts of willpower or motivation. Habits also have the unique power of shaping identity, which goals rarely do. When you commit to habits, you start to see yourself differently. Reading daily is not just about finishing books, it is about becoming a reader. Exercising daily is not just about building muscles, it is about becoming an athlete in mindset. Saving money regularly is not just about accumulating wealth. It is about becoming someone who values discipline and security. Identity drives behavior, and habits build identity. Goals may inspire identity, but only habits sustain it. The future is nothing more than the amplification of today's habits. Every repeated action is a vote for the kind of life you will live. If your days are filled with distraction, your future will reflect distraction. If your days are filled with discipline, your future will reflect discipline. The patterns repeat and they scale. That is why small daily habits matter more than big occasional bursts of effort. The things you do quietly, consistently, are the ones shaping the trajectory of your life far more than the dreams you hold in your head. One of the challenges is that people often confuse goals with control. They think setting a goal means they've taken control of their life. In reality, control comes from habits. A goal to be healthy means nothing if your habit is overeating and avoiding exercise. A goal to be financially free means nothing if your habit is spending recklessly. A goal to be more creative means nothing if your habit is consuming instead of producing. The gap between who you want to be and who you will become is bridged by your habits. Without that bridge, goals are just wishes. It's important to remember that habits are not neutral. They are always pulling you in some direction. Some people assume their future will be shaped by the big choices, but really, it's shaped by the automatic ones. Checking your phone first thing in the morning seems trivial, but repeated for years, it wires your brain for distraction. Choosing to take the stairs instead of the elevator seems small, but repeated for years, it builds stamina and health. Habits may feel insignificant today, but they quietly accumulate and push you toward a future that matches them perfectly. When you look at people who have built meaningful lives, you almost always find that their habits lined up with their values. They weren't perfect, they weren't flawless, but their repeated daily actions pointed toward their vision. They became what they practiced. A person who practices patience daily becomes patient. A person who practices discipline daily becomes disciplined. A person who practices generosity daily becomes generous. Habits don't just determine what you achieve, they determine who you are. This is why the idea that your future resembles your habits more than your goals is not just philosophy, it is practical reality. 10 years from now, you won't magically arrive at your goals. You will arrive at your habits magnified by time. If your habits align with your goals, the future will look like what you imagined. If your habits contradict your goals, the future will look like what you repeatedly did instead. The uncomfortable truth is that your future self is being built today, quietly, in your routines, in your behaviors, in the things you allow yourself to do again and again. If someone wants to know their future, they don't need to look at their vision board or journal. They need to look at their calendar. They need to look at what they do most days. The truth is hiding there in plain sight. A future of health, freedom, wisdom, or fulfillment is not waiting for one big moment of transformation. It is being carved out daily by the habits you are rehearsing now, whether you recognize it or not.